The Legal Podcast Network, from your local legal expert to you.
Hello and welcome to the Legal Podcast Network. I'm your host, Nancy Gregory. Our guest, criminal defense lawyer Rick King with King Morris Attorneys at Law, based in West Palm Beach, Florida. Good to see you again, Rick. Thank you for joining us.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to ask you, what initially sparked your interest in pursuing a career in law, specifically now, criminal defense law, because that's a full plate.
So the answer to that is nothing. I didn't want to be a lawyer. It was never my idea, my goal, nothing. I was a lieutenant in charge of criminal investigations in the police department, and I had a friend come to me and he said, "Hey Rick, would you take this LSAT course with me?" And I was like, "What's an LSAT?" And he's like, "Well, that's the test you take to become a lawyer." And I was like, "No, I don't want to be a lawyer." And he said, "But you're a good test taker, and if you take the test with me, then there's a better chance that I'll pass." And I was, "No, I'm not doing that." And he said, he kept begging. I asked him, "How much was it?" He said the course was $1,100. I said, "Absolutely not." And so my friend, he paid for the course for me to go with him, and so I went. And then maybe I guess a year later or so, I was diagnosed with a degenerative eye disease. I was going blind, and in law enforcement, when you can't see, it's frowned upon to carry a gun. So they asked me to retire, and luckily I had taken this LSAT course. And when you take that course, you have to actually apply to law schools, and I applied to law schools, and I got into every law school that I applied to. But I still had some time left with the police department because I had like FMLA that I could use. So I had a friend drive me to school every day because I couldn't drive, and I finished my first semester of law school while I was still a police officer. And then I actually had both. So I have 2 corneal transplants. By that time, both the surgeries were done, but I still didn't see with the same visual acuity. So I had someone drive me. I retired from law enforcement, and I ended up as a lawyer.
One door closes, the other opens.
That's what they say.
Yes, yeah. Now, with your background and your experiences, how have they shaped your approach to practicing law? Because you have an insight into a lot of different areas that maybe a lot of other lawyers don't.
So really, for me, that's a 2-part thing. So as a former police officer, when I look at a case, I look at it initially from that officer's perspective, because I know from having done that job why we do things, how we do things, and I can look at the report and say, he didn't do that, and with some certainty, because I just know how we train and how we do the job. Or I can look at the report and say he didn't follow protocol here, so something is different. Also, as a former law enforcement officer, and I don't mean this in because there are a lot of really, really good police officers, but there are some that cut corners. And so I scrutinize the work that I see probably more harshly now on the other side. And also I know from being a police officer that sometimes that the guy they did it. And so that's that challenge. Now I have to come back to you and I say, "Hey, listen, I need for you to trust me and be forthright and forthcoming about what happened here, because what you're telling me not making sense." Or sometimes I don't do that, because if that's that guy's story, that's his story. But I have to also know that that there's going to be some challenges in the representation or in the case itself.
From your perspective, though, what are some of the misconceptions that people have about criminal defense lawyers and the criminal justice system?
Well, I think people, as far as criminal defense lawyers, I think people, I get asked the question all the time: how can you represent that guy? Or and so I think one of the misconceptions is that we know sometimes that our clients are guilty. We know that. But at the end of the day, we live in a system that says that the government has to be able to prove it, and not just a little bit. They have to be able to prove it beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt. And with that, that's a challenge. And you have to remember that the burden is on the government. It's a burden situation where we don't have to do anything. We tell juries all the time. I could sit here and read the newspaper, but the government has to prove that case, and not just a little bit. They have to prove it a lot, and they have to prove every single element of every single charge. And so, I think that people sometimes think that we don't understand that process of representing someone, but knowing we're representing the system more than we are the actual person sometimes. In terms of the criminal justice system, I think where there are some misconceptions. I think that some people believe that the system is forgiving. And the criminal justice system is not forgiving, especially in Florida. We're a punishment state. So in Florida, they really don't care about rehabilitation to the extent that they care more about punishment. So here, and especially among my law enforcement clients, law enforcement officers always think when they get arrested, if I just tell that officer what happened and why I did, he's not going to arrest me. Everything is going to be okay. And that's just not true. That officer has a job to do. And at that point, he's not your friend. He's not, they call each other brothers and sisters in that job. That's not your brother any longer. Now you are a suspect in a crime and he's going to do his job. Also, also body cams have changed the game. So now, whereas sometimes maybe, and I'll tell you, I have probably in 2022 and 23 seen a greater uptick in DUIs against police officers, because maybe back in the day, if you stop someone and they're a police officer, you call them a cab, get them a ride home, take care. No longer. Body cams now, everything is on the up and up. And if they stop you and you're on camera, you're going to get arrested. In terms of the criminal justice system, I think where there are some misconceptions. I think that some people believe that the system is forgiving. And the criminal justice system is not forgiving, especially in Florida. We're a punishment state. So in Florida, they really don't care about rehabilitation to the extent that they care more about punishment. So here, and especially among my law enforcement clients, law enforcement officers always think when they get arrested, if I just tell that officer what happened and why I did, he's not going to arrest me. Everything is going to be okay. And that's just not true. That officer has a job to do. And at that point, he's not your friend. He's not, they call each other brothers and sisters in that job. That's not your brother any longer. Now you are a suspect in a crime and he's going to do his job. Also, body cams have changed the game. So now, whereas sometimes maybe, and I'll tell you, I have probably in 2022 and 23 seen a greater uptick in DUIs against police officers, because maybe back in the day, if you stop someone and they're a police officer, you call them a cab, get them a ride home, take care. No longer. Body cams now, everything is on the up and up. And if they stop you and you're on camera, you're going to get arrested.
Right. In your experience, what are the most common challenges clients face when working with a criminal lawyer?
So clients, I guess I would say they have to trust us. And it's a lot, when I met with a client, I met with a client the other day, and, hypothetically, he has a bad problem, and he might be in a bit of a jam here, but he has to come forward and come to grips with, hey, I have a problem. And unfortunately, this is a business, and lawyers don't work for free. And I think one of the problems that people have to come to grips with is, listen, and this is what I tell people all the time. Public defenders are great lawyers. They're in court every single day. They know the judge. They're practicing. They're trying cases, case after case after case. I never, ever dissuade someone from the public defender. If they come to me and, there's an issue with fee, I tell them, listen, that public defender is they're good lawyers, and they're in that courtroom every day. And if that's the route you have to go, feel comfortable. Like, don't go in there thinking that, hey, this is just some public defender and they don't know. No, they know. And they're good and they're quick, and the public defenders we've had here in South Florida for several years, Carrie Howard is really good, and she's trained some really good lawyers, and those lawyers are good at their job. So I never dissuade anyone from.
Right. Help us understand how you handle emotional and ethical challenges of representing clients.
So the emotional end, listen, I'm human like everybody else, and sometimes you get you get caught up in. I like the client, Sometimes they did, and some of my clients have done some, have been convicted of some horrendous things. But like I said, when you are a criminal defense lawyer, you're getting somebody who might be bad on their best behavior, and so when they come to see me, they're broken, and they need someone to help them. And I'll tell you that as a human being, you can't help but to feel some sort of connection with that person. At the same time, and I've had this where, listen, I have felt that my client is actually not guilty of what they were accused of. However, I feel for the family of the victim in the case. And so that the dichotomy of feeling badly for my client, in some cases, especially when, one of my very first cases, actually the very first murder trial that I ever did in my entire life was the defense of a police officer. And in that case, the police officer was doing his job. The other person didn't know he was a police officer. And I guess that's what we believe. He did not know he was a police officer. And unfortunately, the police officer shot and killed him. And I feel terrible for that young man who was killed. The family will never recover. They lost their brother, son, friend, uncle. My client, unfortunately, in that case, I wasn't the lead attorney, but in that case, my client went to prison, and his family lost a brother, son, uncle, father, and there's no winner. Nobody feels better leaving the courthouse. Everybody's still losing, and that is a difficult emotional place to be for the lawyer, because I'm fighting hard for someone, but I also feel horrible for the family of the victim. It's a terrible place sometimes to be, but that's the job that I chose. As far as the ethical considerations of being a criminal defense lawyer, listen, there's hard lines, and I've seen people get in trouble because they don't recognize the hard line. One of the benefits, I think, maybe it's a benefit, and I'm sure there's other lawyers who see the hard line. There's a lot of lawyers who see the hard lines as well. But as a former police officer, you can believe that I identify that hard line, and I'm not going over there. I'm on this side of the table. I don't want to be on that side of the table ever. So I am for me, the ethical portion of this is it's pretty black and white for me, and I stay on the side of not going to jail. I don't want to do that, or getting penalized by the bar. I don't want that either.
No, it's your livelihood. You need to, yes. What do you believe sets your approach apart from other criminal defense lawyers?
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a former law enforcement officer. I think it just gives me an insight. I can listen to those police calls on the radio, and I know the codes. I know what they're saying. I know how they set up, on different things. I know how, and in addition to, I guess just to back you up a bit, as a law enforcement officer, I started out as a road patrol officer. Sorry, my buds are falling. I started out as road patrol. I went to a street level drug interdiction team. Then we did street level drugs. Then I spent a little bit of time on I spent four and a half years assigned to DEA. I worked undercover for probably, of the 20 years that I was a cop, I probably worked undercover for probably 9 or 10. So I know how those cases go. I was a sergeant in charge of a narcotics unit. I was a lieutenant in charge of criminal investigations. So I know how those investigations are supposed to go. I know the tactics now those tactics have changed over the years, Body cams changed a lot. Back in the day, we had what they called pen registers, which was how we looked up who people were calling. Now, everybody has caller ID, so the pen registers were obsolete. Wiretaps became, toward the end of my tenure in narcotics, wiretaps were starting to become more prevalent, and now wiretaps are an everyday thing. Officers are now, police agents are now doing more RICO cases to try and cast a wider net. So there's things that are changing, but as they say, as much as things change, they remain the same. Because at the essence of every investigation, there are fundamentals of investigations that officers follow. And I think my inside knowledge of that gives me a different perspective and sometimes a heads up on things.
Absolutely. Rick, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Rick King, criminal defense lawyer with King Morris Attorneys at Law, based in West Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you for joining us on the Legal Podcast Network. Until next time, I'm Nancy Gregory.
Thank you for joining your leading legal expert today. Feel free to reach out to them should you have further need of their services. This show is brought to you by DM Media Studios. Your producers today were Director of Pre-Production and Show Producer Christine Emmel, Director of Post-Production Dave Visea, and your Executive Producer is Dennis Metter. The Legal Podcast Network is a resource provided by the attorneys featured and has a plethora of legal knowledge readily available to help you find a local expert to help you with your unique legal situation.